Now, to my left, we have the lovely and talented Dawn Wright. Oh, and I just have to say one thing on a sort of lighter note. I don't know if anyone else is a Woody Allen fan, but do you remember Sleeper? Woody Allen, his character is always terrified of the police, which I can totally relate to as someone who has ancestors who came from places where civil liberties really didn't count. And remember that scene in Sleeper where he has that encounter with the policeman and he kind of, his spacesuit blows up? No? Okay, anyway. You know what I'm talking about, okay. I wonder what Woody Allen would say about the G20. We should get him to make a statement.
That's anyway. Next year. Well, Woody Allen here next year.
Next year.
Come back.
Anyway, so Dawn Wright, as I mentioned earlier, if you missed the introduction, is a regional development coordinator with Amnesty International Canada, and he's based here in Vancouver, and he works with Amnesty members and groups, as well as the public and media throughout BC, the Yukon, and Alberta to promote respect for human rights and to end the violation of human rights around the world. I'm hoping he will speak to Amnesty's call for a public inquiry into the events around the G20.
Thank you, and thank you for organizing this panel, and thank you everyone for coming out this afternoon. I'm going to cover a bit of territory. I'm going to tell a short story. I'm going to address the concerns that Amnesty has with the police response to during the G20. Talk about some work that's being done nationally around the whole criminalization of dissent and the way voices are being silenced across the country, and then talk about an art exhibition that Amnesty is organizing on the whole issue of protest art. And as many of you probably know, Amnesty International, our work is based on careful research and documentation, and a lot of that is getting first-hand accounts or eyewitness reports. And so our reports often have stories, the voices of those who have been affected. And so I'm going to read you a short story, a very short story. We were walking home from dinner when heavily armed and armored police started running after people from one direction, yelling at them to move or they would be arrested. But as people started running out of reach of the police, they ran into people running from the other direction, also being threatened with arrest if they did not move. The police grabbed and arrested people at random, and when my friend and I stopped to catch our breath and get out of the rain, an officer ran over and I was about to hit my friend from behind when I yelled out. And when the police officer turned my way, me and my friend ran for our lives. All around us, the story was the same. Peaceful protesters, bystanders, residents out shopping, and journalists were being threatened by the police. On one side, the people on the street were in rain-soaked summer t-shirts and shorts or skirts with shopping bags and the like. On the other side, the police were geared up not only for the weather, but for what I can only describe as an enemy attack. Now, this is a very typical kind of story we'd read in an Amnesty report, and I would normally assume that would be a report out of Zimbabwe, out of Colombia, out of Burma, Iran. I've already heard those kinds of stories from my two colleagues here, but no, this is a report from in Canada, in the streets of Toronto. And it was actually one of my colleagues at the Toronto office. Her and her partner were out for dinner, and they were walking home, and I think they were caught in that kettling that Derek described. And witnessed all kinds of people being arrested, arbitrarily arrested, detained, and thrown in jail, in detention. So, obviously, and governments do bear a very important responsibility to ensure security in and around such events as the G20, but they have an equal responsibility to enable and protect the rights associated with peaceful protest, particularly freedoms of expression, assembly, and association. However, at a time when the public should have been encouraged to actively engage in debate and discussion about pressing global issues, the security measures that were put in place in Toronto in the lead up to the G20 summit instead narrowed the space for civic expression and cast a chill over citizen participation in public discourse. On the streets, protesters were faced with high fences, new weaponry, which Derek has described, massive surveillance, and the intimidating impact of an overwhelming police presence. Combined with uncertainty and worry about unclear powers of arrest, this created an atmosphere in which countless individuals felt unable or too fearful to exercise their rights to freedom of expression and assembly, and participating in rallies and other events which would have offered them an opportunity to express their views on a range of important national issues. I think you've heard enough about some of the other aspects of the G20, of the protest, so I'm going to go straight to the call that we've made. And you might be aware there are now, I think, up to 4 inquiries underway, but they're all very specific inquiries with very limited mandates, and none of them meet the expectations of Amnesty and others around the need for a fully independent review of all G20 security measures, not of just a single police force or of a single piece of legislation, but of the entire range of activities and participants and shareholders in the G20 security operations. So we have issued a call for a national inquiry. We are calling for an inquiry that has full opportunity for public input, and that the results would be released to the public. And I can encourage you to go to the amnesty.ca website and sign on to that letter, the letter that we've issued to the government. And there's quite a lot that we're calling for, as one would expect in the aftermath of such a incredible mass arrests. And our questions would have to include around the kind of police buildup that Derek had described, that provided an overwhelming intimidation on the streets, and how that, in fact, may have provoked violence and vandalism that we did see, and the failure of any opportunity for the public to have any input into how this whole G20 was organized and how the security was organized and the kinds of powers of arrest that were provided to the police. The lack of response of the police to the actual vandalism that took place, and instead focusing on just arbitrarily arresting anyone who happened to be in the area, and their continued justification for those wide-ranging arrests, and failing to discriminate between individuals who may have committed crimes and those who simply were out on the streets exercising their right to protest or simply to be out on the streets as individuals. So you can go to our website and see quite the comprehensive call we've made for that full national inquiry. And just again to reiterate, the inquiries that have been called are all far too narrow and specific to be of any use to really looking at the way that dissent has been criminalized in Canada. And so in that, I want to draw attention to a new coalition that's been formed. It's called Voices, and it's a coalition of about 200 human rights, women's organizations, Aboriginal organizations, labor organizations, environmental, student, faith-based, and development organizations who have got together to look at the way the Canadian government has in fact shut down our voices in a variety of ways and have really impacted on the right to freedom of opinion and expression, something that we need to be really mindful here at an event which in fact is a celebration of freedom of expression. The fact that the government is doing everything it can, everything in its power to systematically undermine democratic institutions and practices, and has in fact eroded the protection of free speech and other fundamental human rights across Canada. And it's done this by deliberately setting out to silence the voices of organizations and individuals who raise concerns about government policies or disagree with government positions. And they issued a declaration on June 17th, so even before the G20 summit, there was a growing concern with the way the government's been responding to peaceful protest and the idea of dissent. And we've seen an impact on the health of democracy in Canada, on freedom of expression, and the state of human rights protection in Canada. So I do invite you to go on the internet and look up Voices and see the declaration and the number of organizations across the spectrum who have been silenced by government, who have been threatened by government, where the basic bottom line is the criminalization of dissent. So the last thing I want to mention before turning it over to the floor is, many of you will know we do an annual film festival here in Vancouver. It's in November 18th to 21st. And in response to what we see in the world, we're working with the theme of protest. So we're inviting artists and activists to submit protest work, protest art that either was used during or in a protest, or is itself an act of protest, and submitting that to an exhibition of protest art. We're opening the festival with a film called Sounds Like a Revolution, which is all about the way the music industry and the retail industries in the United States are trying to shut down any kind of music that is about protest and dissent. And we're going to have the Raging Grannies open the event for us, another aspect of protest. So I do invite you to see me afterwards for a call for entries if you're interested as an artist or just want more information. And I think with that, we'll turn it over to the floor.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Don Wright from Amnesty International Vancouver office. That was good to know about the action that Amnesty is taking in terms of calling for the public inquiry that's really of a wide enough scope to do it justice. And good to know about your film festival and the call for protest art. So just as you mentioned, I wanted to point out, because we're here at Word on the Street, and you're talking about the problem of the criminalization of dissent in Canada. And a friend of mine is here today from China, and I was reminded of a talk I did for PEN Canada with a Chinese writer, and just anecdotally, she said that when her book was banned by the Chinese government, the sales skyrocketed. So I know that Harper weighed in on a play recently at a festival in Ontario, who can remember the name of the play, about the homegrown terrorists in Canada. And he hadn't actually seen the play, he just objected to it on some grounds that it was celebrating terrorism or something. And I thought, oh, well, the next step is going to be book banning. But of course, if the Chinese example is also appropriate here, then that might actually boost some dwindling Canadian book sales. Hope he bans my book. Hope he bans your book.